Um, so here is a Scalding Tarn. It's going to start things off here. Dan did scry to the bottom, so it really didn't matter what his scry did. He'll start with a fetch land here. So he'll start by fetching out a Watery Grave into 17. He does have in hand, I believe, a Serum Visions, so we're probably going to see him go there this turn to start his game off. A little bit of setup, never bad. We saw him earlier when he was on camera. He lost to Naya Blitz. Now, Elves is also aggressive, but not. It doesn't have the burst that the Naya Blitz deck does. Now, one thing Paul does have, he is playing 4 Shaman of the Packs, which, if he's able to amass a good board state and just land a big Shaman, that could be more than enough to end this game as well. So we start things off here with a Guiltleaf Palace, which is going to put out a copy of Elvish Mystic. Dan on the end step is going to go ahead and cycle this Street Wraith away, picks up a card, loses 2 life, has a second one even, down to 13 now. So Death Shadows will be playable if he has them. I don't think he does. I think his hand right now is a bunch of lands and Gurmag Anglers and a Snapcaster Mage. Well, he can play a Gurmag Angler, which is nice this turn. Because he can fetch... Does he have a Death Shadow, maybe? That might be a Death Shadow in his hand. If it is, he's in a really good spot. He can fetch Shock down to 10 and play a Death Shadow as a 3/3. It looks like he is going to be fetching, and it looks like he is going to be shocking. Yeah, he gets a Steam Vents here, so... I believe we are going to see him... I think it is Death Shadow. Yeah, it is. Okay, he does have Death Shadow. So sure enough, there it is. It's a 3/3. Now, Elves does not have an answer to a Death Shadow. They're green. They just don't have an answer to this. So Nettle Sentinel comes down. Heritage Druid's a good follow-up. Where else are we going this turn? 3 mana. What are we going to play? We're going to play an Elvish Archer. That's a good one. That untaps the Nettle Sentinel, and we're going to pass it right back to Dan. So we now have a 3/3 and a pair of 2/2s on Paul's side of the board, along with that Arc Druid. So this is a good curve out here for Paul, and this is the kind of start and the curve out he needs that makes Shaman of the Pack really good. I think Dan picked up another land, so his hand is 3 lands, Snapcaster, Gurmag Angler. I'm curious if Dan wants to develop his board further this turn with a Gurmag Angler, or if he wants to try and find something to do with Snapcaster Serum Visions. He has a fetch land again, so he can add another card to the graveyard. So he can have a 1-mana Gurmag, but that would also include exiling the Serum Visions, which does make it a little bit rougher for his potential draws. He's going to go to 8 here, make his Death Shadow a 5/5. Can he even afford to attack? No, he can't. Well, I mean, he can get 1 attack in here for free. Paul shouldn't attack if it's not lethal. You've seen plenty of people lose to Death Shadow because they attack and put them to like 1 or 2, thinking, okay, I'll get them next turn, and they have a Shadow in play, and that's all they need, right? You give them an 11/11 or a 12/12, and it's going to be game over pretty quickly for you. So here is going to be a Gurmag. I think he's going to exile everything except for that Serum Visions. Sure enough, that's what he does. Yep, exiles everything except for the Serum Visions. And yeah, he does not attack. He's just going to pass the turn. Paul will pick up a card I couldn't get a good look at. So, but lots of mana now. He's got 4, 7, 8, 9 mana to work with now. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. There's an Azuri. Oh, that's real good. How are you paying for Azuri here with that Arc Druid, or that Mystic rather? Sure. Arc Druid now allows for an overrun on its own, which would be how much here? 5/11. 11. 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 11 So Dan could... Is he going to go for it here? This is risky because there's already a shadow in play. I don't know if Dan plays Battle Rage anymore. I haven't watched Modern closely enough to keep track of whether or not they play that anymore, but all right. There will be no attack. I like just leaving up regeneration shields here. I think that's much safer. Dan, I believe, picked up a copy of Tassiger, so that's another awkward draw. His draws have not been kind this game. Multiple delve creatures don't typically go together very well unless you have things like Thought Scour to kind of fight him out with, but flush it out with. But yeah, no, Paul has in hand a copy of Court of Calling. I did see that. Oh, it's true. He could have courted this turn for. Well, would it have mattered? Or I guess he can still court on end step here. Yeah. Yeah, Paul can on end step here court for a Shaman of the Pack to deal 6 damage to Dan. And that'll, I imagine, end the game. So Dan did start by fetching away this turn down to 7. Scry is going to look at, I believe, a second copy of Death Shadow and a Bloodstained Mire. So Death Shadow's fine to leave on top. He doesn't need more land. There's no question about that. I don't know what Dan drew off of the Serum Visions, but like something like a Fatal Push would be a great pickup right now. Just a way to deal with that Azuri. It looks like he picked up a copy of Claim to Fame. That's just not going to matter. So this is going to be game here. Paul's going to go ahead, cord for a Shaman of the Pack. Dan doesn't have blue mana, so it's not like he can stubborn denial this. That'll get him a Shaman. That'll bring Dan to 1. Paul will activate Azuri's second ability of give all my elves +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. He'll turn all his guys sideways, and that'll be the game. So, all right, off to a game 2. We're gonna go. Dan will have the play here again. His hand wasn't bad. He drew a lot of lands. It was a real rough there for sure. So Dan here, though, does have a pretty good sideboard for this matchup. He does have Entered Explosives, a couple of Anger of the Gods. So he definitely has some good choices here for this Little Green Men beatdown matchup. So we'll have to see if he can find those sideboard cards. Really just wants to draw better than he did in game 1, which I feel like it included like 7 or 8 lands, which you don't need. Death Shadow should not, I imagine, ever need 7 lands to operate. 4 is probably a comfortable number. Maybe a little more, but 4 is probably a good number. All right, so Paul usually has a one-of copy of Chameleon Colossus in his sideboard. Could be okay here. Gets to free block Gurmag Anglers nicely. It gets to block Death Shadow as well, which is good. So that's definitely a choice. Also blocks... Well, no, it also blocks Tasker. What am I talking about? Blocks Tasker just fine. Paul also typically has a one of Selfless Spirit in his sideboard, which would also be great here. So I feel like Paul has good sideboard answers to counter Dan's sideboard answers. Because I also think that Paul has a one of copy of Burton Forge Tender in his sideboard as well. So he just has really great options here in his sideboard for this matchup. For the post-board game specifically, just because Dan is going to bring in these cards that he has to bring in, but they just get blown out by Paul's sideboard cards. Well, I guess actually Paul might not think to bring in Burton Forge Tender, to be fair. Dan's been all black, so why necessarily would you bring in something like a pro red thing? that doesn't serve a purpose yet. Not that Paul knows about possibly, so. However, if he's seen Dan play tonight or, knows the composition of the deck, absolutely, I think it's a fine play to bring in a Fortuner if it's available to you. Having all those silver bullets is great when you have cards like Court of Calling. Just to, when you need it, go find it sort of thing. It's just very, very helpful. So, all right, gonna look here at their opening sevens, see if there is anything worth keeping. Dan did mulligan to 6 last game. And Dan has not had a friendly night on camera here with his mulligans. In terms of at least in keeping his opening hand at least. So he's tanking here again, potentially looking at going to 6 again. No, looks like he's kept, but Paul in this case is going to go ahead and take the mull to 6 here. So Paul going to be the one this game to start at a lower hand size. I feel like both these decks mulligan just fine. Elves definitely has a fine mulligan that I can work with here, so a lot of redundant cards. Okay. Paul here looking at a 6. Is it going to be good enough? He's thinking. He's got at least one force I can see in his hand there. All right, Paul is in fact going to keep his scry. Looks like it stayed on top. Yes, it did. So Dan going to go ahead, start with a Scalding Tarn. Going to get a Blood Crypt. Down to 17 he goes. Does he have something like a Thoughtseize or Inquisition here? Those would be good starts. Does he have it? He is Street Wraith. Okay, he's down to 15 now. Can he get a turn 1 Death Shadow into play? That'd be crazy. No, he's got Thoughtseize. Okay. It's a good start, though. He's at 13 already. So what did Paul keep? Paul kept Nettle Sentinel, Court of Calling, Abrupt Decay, a pair of Gilt-Leaf Palaces, and a Forest. I feel like we're probably going to be taking... Probably the Abrupt Decay. Seeing as how it does kill Dan's biggest threat, which is the Death Shadow, so... Sure enough, he does take away that Abrupt Decay, so... Paul here gets to start things off, of course, with that Nettle Sentinel off of that Gilt-Leaf Palace. Where are we going to next here? Dan going to have another Scalding Tarn. Potentially down to 10 here. And really, short of Paul's draw step, he doesn't have much in hand. We don't know what he drew, of course. But the rest of his hand wasn't super exciting. We have turn 2 Tasker here for Dan, though. That's a good start. That is a very good start. Okay, there's a Llanowar Elf. Sure. It's the pass back again. So again, Paul right now in hand has a Forest and a Court of Calling. And I think that's all he has right now. No, there's going to be one more we don't know about. He's had 2 draw steps. So, all right, Tassiger attacks and just gets chump blocked. I don't know about that chump block. I mean, right now you just need a critical mass of elves to matter here, Paul. So I don't think you can really afford to just throw them away to save 4 life. You're at 20. You got plenty of time. Dan picked up a very good card there in Stubborn Denial. That's going to be great against that Court of Calling that he knows is there. Wow, just going to block here as well. What is Paul's plan? Paul, man, what is your game plan here, sir? Collected Company? I mean, that's a good game plan, but I mean, it's going to get countered because Dan picked up Stubborn Denial, but Dan here with another land. Yeah, that's also very possible. Just planning for a better hand here in game 3. Sure. His opening 6 wasn't fantastic by any means. So even with, I mean, I feel like he kept possibly on the Abrupt Decay. The lighting, and we have some weird banners that kind of cast some shadows. I can brighten the camera a little bit, but the issue is then it just gets all wonky on our next stream, so. Okay, here's another attack for 4. We have an Azuri. We have a Lightning Bolt for Azuri. Azuri, of course, cannot save himself. He does say regenerate another target elf. Not just target elf, unfortunately. Another Nettle Sentinel comes down, but that just isn't going to matter here. I feel like this game is pretty much over. We have an activation here of Tasigur. The options here are 2 Fatal Push or a Lightning Bolt. Sure. That's the way you draw up Tasigur activation against elves, that's for sure. Court of Calling. We are going to stop that. Not surprising. Fatal Push and attack for 4 will finally bring Paul to 16, so the first one that gets to connect. Another Thoughtseize for Dan. He also has Anger of the Gods. Yeah, his hand's great. Paul now at 12 after the attack. So yeah, this I don't see any sequence of cards that gets Paul out of this. Short of like multiple Cocos in a row that just hit good things. Do we have a Coco here first? We might. I don't really know though. Let's see. Dan doing some math here, it looks like. Big Fish comes down, Gurmag Angler. Coming in for 9 now, so Paul gonna fall to 3. Paul does have a Court of Calling here, so... Oh, yeah, gross. Yeah, that's that. All right. We're going to head to a game 3 here. Dan, very successful in evening things up here. Now, Paul will have the play for game 3, which is nice for elves. An accelerated start can do a lot of work for this elves deck, so if Paul's able to have one of his... turn 1 mana dorks, which is it's likely his deck is, pretty much built to have one of those on turn 1, so have to imagine we'll see one come down. It could lead to a pretty good game here now if Dan doesn't have an answer, of course. But we'll have to see. So far, the rule of this matchup is don't mulligan, because you'll lose. See if our players can both find a 7 this time. Maybe we can have a little bit closer of a game potentially. Both of these players are qualified for our invitational that we have coming up on August the 13th. They both qualified via points. Dan, in fact, actually has one of our buys, so congrats again to him on that buy. Very well earned. I think he was actually the top point earner for our entire tournament series. The invitational, for anyone maybe not aware of what's going on with that, August 13th, we have a modern invitational we're holding here. It's going to be 5 rounds of Swiss followed by cut to top 8. The first prize is going to be $1,000 cash to the winner. All the seats have already been determined, so if you're wondering how you can get in on that kind of action, we are starting another invitational September. We do one for standard as well. We just haven't broadcasted them because our turnout for standard has not been great. Unfortunately, standard right now, and I'm sure it's not just us feeling this, standard is just not popular at the moment, unfortunately. Yeah, it's probably on the way back up, I will say. The new set seems okay. We'll have to see how dominant mono red really is. But honestly, I don't think it's that dominant. I think you can get hit out very easily. It's very good at the Pro Tour, but mono red typically is always good at the Pro Tour. So, all right, looking at 7s here. I think Dan has no lands, so yeah, going to be an easy mulligan. His hand looked great, unfortunately. He had like engineered explosives. There was an Anger of the Gods on top of the deck, but Dan already tried keeping in a lander today, so I don't think he's really up to doing it twice. Paul, however, has kept 6, so it's going to be up to Dan to try and break this cycle of if you take a mulligan, you lose. Again, if I'm not mistaken, Paul is the undefeated player in this matchup. I don't believe he's picked up a loss tonight. We know Dan has. We also have 2 others still battling out at 2-0 or 3-0. Those are Barry and Chris. So we might see Barry next round again. We might also see Paul next round again, facing off against Barry. We'll have to see. Dan here looking at 6. He's got a Thoughtseize and a Water Grave, it looks like. So he's got a turn 1 play. He is going to keep. He's going to scry. It's going to go to the bottom. So Paul, Cavern of Souls, Elvish Mystic. That's the start he's looking for. Dan picks up Stubborn Denial, which is very good. It's good at stopping Chords and Cocos. Dan has a Bloodstained Mire to start things off here, though. So I imagine we're going to put him to 17 here quickly. Sure enough, there's the Blood Crypt. He also has a Thoughtseize to go with that. So we're going to have Dan at 15 here on turn 1, which is a really good start for the Death Shadow game plan. So he's got to be happy about that. Oh, this is a streak. That's great. So he's at 13 already even. Picks up a copy of Serum Visions. And yeah, Thoughtseize will take a look here at Paul's hand. So we've got Shaman of the Pack, Overgrown Tomb, Shaman of the Pack, Court of Calling, and a Temple Garden. Well, I mean, Paul might just have a game plan here this game of turn 2 Shaman, turn 3 Shaman, get you dead. He's going to, Dan's going to avoid that, though. He's going to take away one of the 2 Shamans, leaving Paul there with, he still has access to a turn 2 Shaman. How good it is, I don't know. I don't think it's great, to be honest. However, the rest of his plays aren't very exciting either, so we are going to see him play out the Shaman anyways. That's going to bring Dan to 11, himself to 18, because he did shock in to play that Temple Garden. Overgrown Tomb, of course, providing black mana, so... Or, not Overgrown Tomb, I'm sorry, Cavern of Souls, providing black mana there for the Shaman. But Dan has a great hand here. A pair of Death Shadows on turn 2, and they're 4/4s. This was a great setup here for Dan. Paul, did you find a Collected Company, or do you just have Cord to work with right now, buddy? Oh, you found the Collected Company. All right, this is also great for Paul. What does this Coco find? We got a Heritage Druid, I think a Lawnmower Elf in there. Cord is still in hand for Paul as well, so he's got a lot to work with. Very key fact as well, Death Shadow, of course, does not have Trample. So Dwynen's Elite and Heritage Druid's a great combo of cards to get off Collected Company. So there's the Elite to start it off, and there is as well the Heritage Druid. So Paul will get a token to go along with that. He's got some mana to work with now. Also a good heads-up play by Paul for not waiting until Dan's turn to go for that Collected Company. He, of course, already saw Stubborn Denial in game 2. Doesn't want to run the risk of having it get blown out again here in game 3. So I definitely agree with that. Paul is just going to pass the turn back to Dan. So now Dan does have in hand a copy of Engineered Explosives. However, the most effective number to deal with Paul's board right now is 1, which coincidentally also blows away all of Dan's board. So probably not something he wants to do. Dan here thinking he's got Serum Visions, Stubborn Denial, and Explosives in hand. He really would like an Anger of the Gods. That'd be the best card for him right now. But even if he finds it with that Serum Visions, it won't really matter. Okay, so Dan going to start by sacrificing this Polluted Delta. He's down to 8, potentially 6 if he wants to. I imagine that he's going to want to find a second red here, so potentially a Steam Vents. No, he finds just a second blue. He doesn't have any more land in hand, though, right? So if he does find an Anger now, he can't cast it, which is a little bit awkward. I can understand not wanting to go to 6 against what your opponent has currently. Especially also knowing that they have in hand a Court of Calling to go find another Shaman of the Pack to end the game. But yeah, I guess he has no choice here, right? So his Scries looks like both go on top here. He picked up, I think, another Serum Visions though. Yeah, he did. So I deal a card on top of the deck, Fatal Push right now. I deal 2 cards, Untapped Red Source and Anger of the Gods. He's going to shove for 5 here with this 1 Death Shadow. Paul, just take the damage, man. No blocks, buddy. Take that hit down to 11. You don't need to block this. You're not in any danger. Why are you trying to kill a Death Shadow? That's not a good idea. Come on, Paul. I believe in you. No blocks. Or if you're going to block, yeah, the token's probably the best one to get in the way with, I guess. Sure. If you feel like you have to block here. I'm not exactly sure what Paul's afraid of there, but all right. Elf token down. So there is the Mystic back out in front. Here's another Mystic. Again, we still have Court of Calling in hand, so we can Cord for a Shaman to go to 6 here. To put Dan to 6. I think... Yeah. Well, the issue is Dan, of course, has Stubborn Denial in hand that we know about, so the Cord's not going to matter no matter what he does, but... Paul does just pass the turn, which I agree with. So Dan's still at 8 here. Don't think he found a way to deal any more damage to himself, but here we're going to have a Serum Visions get fired off. It's going to pick him up a copy of Snapcaster Mage, look at a Scalding Tarn, and I don't know what that other card was, but I want to say it was a Gurmag, but I'm not positive about that. Dan, whatever the 2 cards are, he's thinking about them. All right, Dan, what are you going to do? A lot of thought being put into these 2 cards here. What are they? Again, we know one is a Scalding Tarn, so both on the bottom of the deck. All right. So again, his hand now, Stubborn Denial, Explosive, Snapcaster Mage, and I think a Gurmag is in there as well. So, Paul, man, what are you doing? You don't need to make these blocks. Come on, buddy. I really have to question what... I mean, I know that Death Shadow can have a lot of burst, but it doesn't have that much burst. Paul, second copy Heritage Druid. Here's a Fatal Push on the Elite. Sure. Paul's going to try and court in response, but this is going to get met with a Stubborn Denial, of course. And Death Shadows are definitely big enough, so that's not going to allow Paul the opportunity to pay. Paul has a token in his graveyard, but that's sure, whatever. Okay, so here's the attack with a pair of Death Shadows. Let's get him front. Get him in there. This one I can see a little more. Like if Dan's able to like cycle a couple Street Rich, something like that, Paul could be in a lot of trouble, but yeah, no, I mean, Paul, what? I don't even know if he can draw. He needs another Coco probably, but Dan now has Snapcaster Mage to stop that entire play. So I think Paul let this game slip away from him. I think this is a game that Paul definitely could have won had he just been a little more sparing with his life total. It's a resource at the end of the day, right? You can't look at your life like it's the most. I mean, it's obviously important, but you don't need all 20 of it to win the game. Drew another Shaman. That'll put Dan to 5, but that's fine. It's not anywhere close to lethal, so Dan now has a pair of 8/8s, and this is gonna end the game. I mean, Dan here can even just Snapcaster to clear away one of these blockers. The Heritage Druid in this case, because he doesn't have Revolt right now. Which I think he's going to do. Yeah, he is. Okay. Get the Heritage Druid out of the way. So he can bolt away one of these Shamans. And that guarantees that Paul takes 10. Okay, so Paul takes 2, falls to 14. Yeah, I think Paul playing just a little bit too safe here, and just he's going to lose because of it. So, congrats to Dan. He wins.